we just went live. So whenever Myron joins us here.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, Pam. Hi, Dave. Hi, Heidi.
I don't know if y'all can hear it, but I have a 7-pound Chihuahua on the next level snoring, and it's the loudest thing I've heard out of such a small creature.
Can't hear him.
That's good. I was trying to take a nap the other day, and there was 2 snoring Chihuahuas and 1 farting lab, and so I gave up.
I'll make sure he got the email yesterday.
He's connecting.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I got held up. Trying to exit a phone call. Should we call the meeting to order? Okay, let's call Committee of the Whole meeting to order for today. At this time, we're going to take a look at the bylaws and want to thank Attorney Hicken for all the work that she's done, as well as all of you in looking through these documents. And we spent some time in this quite a while ago, so it's good that we try to revisit it. And I think we all feel it's important to have this in place going into next year. And our collective knowledge, I think, is important as we ponder and consider some of these very important ways to proceed and as far as policy development. So with that, Attorney Hicken, are you with us? I don't see you, but I haven't. Yes, there you are. Okay. I'll turn it over to you, and thanks again for all your work.
Thank you, Commissioner Bersheim, Chair Bersheim. So commissioners, today we are going to look at a few more sections of the proposed bylaws or rules of operating procedure for the Cook County Board. A reminder that I'm just drafting these based on a collection of other bylaws that I've seen from other counties. I am doing my very best to draft these consistent with what I've observed as the kind of standard procedure for the board, or what you've indicated you wish the standard procedure to be. But these are not my bylaws. These are your bylaws. So I'm asking you to carefully read them and to feel free at every point to give me feedback, suggest different language, all of that. You should have seen in your packet the drafted sections that we'll be working on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does anyone have any preliminary questions before we dive in?
Just one, Molly, is if assuming we're able to get through these today, how many more sessions do you think we will need? Just one more? I
think one more session. I mean, there are 3 sections left. They're pretty small. I think they could be dealt with pretty quickly. So what I was anticipating is that we might even be able to address those 3 sections and pass the whole thing, or, get consensus that they're in good shape to approve in total at the next session. So we could do that at Committee of the Whole in September, or we could do that earlier if you wish. I'm available.
Okay, thank you.
So this is our table of contents, which should be updated to be consistent with the current draft. This is draft number 5. The sections that we'll be addressing today will be rules of procedure. That's section 5. Section 6, types of board action. Section 7, county board agenda. Section 8, committees. So I'm going to jump to page 13. The copy that you got attached to the board packet is a PDF, and it's probably cut out all these other pages and starts at page 13.
Page 7 of the agenda packet.
Right.
Thank you. All right. Let's
Okay.
make it bigger. All right. So rules of procedure. We've never written down what our rules of procedure are. We've never adopted Robert's Rules of Order other than to just say, you know, in general, Robert's Rules of Order can guide us when there's a question about our procedure. This draft of the bylaws changes that. Again, it's up to you to accept that change or not, or, you know, decline to be more formal about it. But I've gotten enough questions from commissioners during meetings that I felt that it might be helpful to lay out officially what all the motions are, what the precedence of motions, that kind of thing. But we start with rules of procedure with kind of some ground rules for the board. And those come in these two sections: A, principles of the rules of procedure, and B, meeting engagement and restriction on off-topic discussion. So take a look at these. We have 1 through 10. These are principles of the rules of procedure that came from another set of bylaws, which I think are consistent with kind of what Robert's Rules of Order might designate as the general rules. I don't know that any of these would be controversial. This paragraph here kind of lays out in narrative form what the foundation for rules of order is. And the third paragraph just states that the rules foster courtesy and decorum, holding firm to the maxim that one must debate motions, not members. So a reminder that we don't take things personally in a board meeting. Section B is completely highlighted. So I'm just going to summarize what's in section B, and then I'll go back and ask if anyone has any questions, additions, proposed edits to A and B. Section B, meeting engagement and restriction on off-topic discussion. The first thing I did here is to reference 2 resolutions from last year, which I think may help guide commissioners and future commissioners. 2019-73 is the respectful communication resolution. 2019-74 is the speak your piece resolution. I have addendums 1 and 2. And if you'd like to see these resolutions again, they are in your board packet, the online version now, or I can display them and share my screen. And then here are some specific rules to kind of help lay out or be consistent with those resolutions. It's about not interrupting. It's about being recognized by the chair before you begin to speak. It's about keeping the conversation as a group conversation and not going between 2 commissioners. And it's also about kind of staying off your phones unless absolutely necessary. So with the exception of addressing urgent matters, we try not to email, text, or do other electronic communications during meetings. You know, these seem like basic rules. They seem like a pretty common sense rules to me. And then a reminder, number 6, here's your attorney reminding you that anything that you do put in writing during a meeting is per se public data. So there is no private exchange of text messages if they have any relation to county business during a meeting. They're gonna be per se public. Okay. What would you like to address in sections A and B?
Chairman Bershheim?
Yes.
Molly, I was looking at under Rules of Procedure number 9. We're in a interesting situation now until next January where there'll be 4 of us. Would we need to make a note about when there's a board of 4, how procedure would be done with voting?
So we can get that specific if you would like to. The general rule is that you need a majority when you're 4 is the same as a majority when you're 5. In other words, you need that 3. You need the 3 votes to take action, whether it's a 5-member board or a 4-member board.
Okay.
The 2/3 vote, I haven't done the math there. Is that actually, I think it's going to be the same rule.
Right.
A 2/3 vote and the number of
Okay.
votes required for that as a 5-member board are still what's going to be required for a 2/3 vote when you're a 4-member board. You don't, your vote gets no more quote power or weight just because there are 4 of you instead of 5.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Then on recognizing the board during discussion, during my tenure, and maybe Heidi can reflect back on hers, we've done a variety of things. We've had up and down the row. We start with one on the left or we start with one on the right, and everybody has a chance to say or nay on a topic or give an opinion or whatever. Then we've done the raising of the hands. I don't know how all of you feel, but it would be nice if we had, and maybe that is up to the board chair to designate how I will recognize you. For me, it was easier when we went up and down the row because you knew you had your turn coming. But I don't know how everybody else feels about being recognized at a board meeting.
Yeah, Jenny, I don't know if that needs to be written in this section of the, I don't know what you want to call it, policy of how the board interacts with each other. I think it's up to each chair. You and I have had the luxury of experiencing different ways of doing things. This section feels very much like a dictatorship to me. But I think it still needs to be somewhat stated so that we understand. It feels like we're completely eliminating open discussion between each other with these rules. As a person who has been ignored by the chair and not called on, I find this section very restricting. Sometimes a commissioner is saying something and you have a question, and it really, each situation is different. I mean, you can have a question that you can sit on and wait till the very end, but if Commissioner Mills says something and I need to have clarification on it before he continues to talk, this whole do not interrupt and wait until you're called on by the chair doesn't lead to that at all. It makes it very difficult, and it makes it very hard to follow along, because if my turn comes 3 commissioners later and I ask Commissioner Mills a question, we could have a 7-hour-long meeting going back and readdressing what was going forward. So I don't know how to change it, but it feels very dictatorship and very censoring to me. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Mills. Commissioner Mills.
Thank you. Commissioner Dukirk, which you're saying section, it's not on the screen right now. You're saying section A, the principles of rules and procedures feels unfair?
Dave right here is a darn good example where you're asking me a question, and according to these new rules, I would have to wait until the chair lets me answer you instead of just answering you for the love of Christmas. So I am looking at B, meeting engagement and restrictions on and off topic discussion. Like number 2, any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair and not proceed until being recognized.
So one reason that these rules are set up this way is the guidance that we want efficient. We want, let's see, where is it? The Canon of Efficiency. So when one person, the chair, the person that the board has designated as the chair, kind of has control of the conversation. And there are benefits to that and there are drawbacks. One of the benefits of that is that the conversation can proceed in an orderly fashion. One person decides what order of conversation the conversation goes in, or decides, okay, we've had enough discussion on this topic and now we're going to move forward. But you always have the ability as a commissioner to ask for recognition. A commissioner who is talking, like if in this conversation, when Commissioner Mills saw that you were raising your hand, the Commissioner Mills can say, Chair, I'd like to give some time to Commissioner Dukirk. I can see how when you move from an extremely informal way of discussing things, like we had 5 years ago when meetings lasted 3 hours, into this format, that seems like a really drastic change. And you can see all the kind of negative points of it, but it's a balance. There are positive points to it too. And as long as you have a chair who's doing their best effort to include everyone, might not be perfect, but is making their best efforts, this should work well 90% of the time, 90+% of the time. Again, I'm willing to change the language if you have different suggestions.
Molly, I'm wondering, these particular rules, would they apply to committee of the whole meetings, which are more workshops, or would they only apply to our regular commissioner meetings? It seems to me that there's a different kind of discussion that happens at a work group than at a more formal meeting. Just wondering.
That is your option. We haven't mentioned whether these rules are suspended at the time of a workshop or not. We can add a sentence. We can say that the rules of procedure may be suspended at a workshop discussion or committee of the whole, or that these rules can always be suspended should a commissioner make a motion to suspend the rules. That appears later in this section. So you can make it the discretion of the chair. You can make it at certain meetings, they don't apply. Do you have a suggestion?
Attorney Hicken, I don't know if you can see me or not. But I would like to just add that I think for the clarification as far as being board chair, for our discussion purposes today, and I think in a committee of the whole, we could be more informal. And so I think when I turn the meeting over to you, I should have clarified this, and I'll do that now, that you can speak to you as the moderator of this meeting. And if you're comfortable with that. And does that clarify the issue for today at least, and going forward on committee of the whole? Everyone understand that?
Yes.
Secondly,
Fine.
one of the challenges that we've had is to do things by telephone. And there you don't see anyone. And so, you know, some of these things, as I looked into the document last night and reading through this again, you know, some of these things get a little bit more complicated, especially if you're doing telephone meetings. And so, yeah, I can understand Commissioner Kirk's concerns, because when you're operating with no visual clues, you lose the dynamics of being less formal. And so as chair this year, and I'm not trying to defend myself, but just presenting the rationale that in order to get good response or seek good response from each individual commissioner, I've been going, you know, roll call round robin, even before we get to motions, just so that we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard, because unless we start interrupting each other, which could be very problematic in you know, the efficiency of a meeting, because it would be just wide open discussion. I think you need some kind of decorum, and unfortunately during the pandemic, maybe that's why we read the changes, that we would have to modify those things. So I would hope that when we adopt these things and as the pandemic might continue, that we, like at the beginning of the year or before, hopefully, which I doubt, you know, that we, the chair and vice chair or whatever, talk a little bit about how they want to conduct those meetings and how we could modify these things. So what I'm leading to is there some kind of provision here that we could provide as a, you know, a statement dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic issues? That's a question to you, to all of you, I guess, but mainly to you, Attorney Hicken.
We have another section that we already went through related to types of meetings. And that would be it's been so long since we worked on these bylaws, I can no longer remember if we actually addressed this or if it was just on my list of things to address, but to include virtual or remote meetings in that section, I think would be a natural place for it to go. Okay. Depending on what you wanted to say about these types of meetings, it could go there or it could go under here. If you wanted to somehow say the rules of procedure are different, or if you wanted to kind of tweak rules of procedure related to remote style meetings, you could put a line in here. I haven't heard how you would wish to tweak the rules of procedure yet.
Okay. I think it goes to roll call, and that's read in statute requirements that we will use roll call voting and as well. But I think also, at least I took that as well, we should do some roll call, you know, opportunities for people to respond about the topic before we go into formal motions and supports and voting, so that we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to speak. Otherwise, I think if you didn't and you can't see people, or you know, or people interrupt each other, you just really lose that potential. Make sure that the individual is heard as a commissioner.
Commissioner Bershine?
Yes.
So a suggestion I have is under B, meeting engagement, number 2, any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair. That leaves it open, and as each person is put into the position of chair, they can set their rules and not be as strict or be more strict as they choose. And then number 3, when a member is speaking, other members shall not interrupt. Just seems a little less dictatorship, I guess. And my issues with being censored were long before the COVID-19 meetings over.
So with that proposed change, Commissioner Dukirk, it would be allowable for another commissioner to completely interrupt a commissioner while they were speaking?
That's up to the chair. You know, when I was a chair and we didn't have these rules, if I saw that we had commissioners trying to talk over each other, and I would just say, you know, one at a time, or as the chair, it's my responsibility to make sure that everyone gets heard. And that's where roundtable came in, because it was a way to make sure that every person had a voice at the table. And so this allows that ability. And it still reminds us, instead of just completely removing 2 and 3, it's still a reminder to all of us that we address the chair and that we don't interrupt each other. And that is part of our respectful communication and speak your piece. But I mean, just the way that 2 and 3 are written, it just seems very restrictive.
So the suggestion in paragraph 2 is to strike the language that I've highlighted and not proceed until being recognized. Is that right?
I would just say any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair.
Okay. And then in paragraph 3, your suggestion would be
Members shall not interrupt person speaking.
What about the call to order?
Yeah, I think that,
We all know how to use call to order.
Is there a consensus for the changes that Commissioner Dukirk has suggested? Or do you wish to make a different change or leave the language as it is?
So the change is striking the yellow highlighted section and then only having the italicized and now yellow highlighted section. Is that right, Commissioner Dukirk?
On number 2, it would just be any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair, and everything else after that is removed.
And then number 3.
And number 3, as harsh as it is, I think I for one need that reminder. No interrupting.
But it's just no member shall interrupt while another is speaking?
Correct. That gives respect to the public also, and our staff.
Yeah, it's not as formal. I'm comfortable with it. It still sets. It's still, you know, I think it still gets our points across. I think what Attorney Hickens' concern was with the number 2 was that it without having the chair recognize the speaker, then everyone can just, like, say there's a chair, that's one commissioner, and there's 4 other commissioners. All 4 commissioners can just speak to the chair at the same time. But then you're saying that it's up to the chair to sort that out.
Yeah, so if for some crazy reason something's going on and all 4 of us say Commissioner Bersheim, he can maybe hopefully decipher which one of us said it first, and he would say, okay, all of you want to speak, so I am going to start with Commissioner Mills, and then When he is done, we will move through and you will all have an opportunity to speak.
But you don't want that written into the bylaws?
No, because I'm not in kindergarten and we all understand that.
Well,
That even though we're not in kindergarten, we are setting this up for future. So we will have a board change and maybe this will be helpful for now. When two people want to have an opinion that the board, that the chair, you know, sets the precedent by saying whatever, you know, I'll recognize Commissioner Dukirk and then follow it up by Commissioner Mills. So I think it'd be good to leave it in there for now. We're thinking about the future.
Attorney Hicken?
Yep.
When you did your research on this, this was sort of a common way of writing up procedures for county boards, correct?
Yep,
So I
did.
think it's got some merit by your research. And I respectfully look at it a little differently. I think sometimes clarity is important. So we all know what is expected, but that's just where I come from. We don't mean to be offensive to anyone, but it's unfortunate that people feel that way. But it's really hard to write bylaws or any kind of procedures that are going to fit everyone's personal, beliefs on things or how they react to them. And so I guess my question and my support for your writing was based upon these seem to be common practices. And you feel that is a pretty good reflection of other boards and what they've developed.
I do.
So if I'm interpreting this correctly, I'm just addressing number 2 right now, B2. If we leave it as it is, the Commissioner Dukirk's concern is that it's more restrictive, and that the chair the chair is in control of that restriction. And so what Commissioner Dukirk's suggesting is striking it, but then it's again up to the chair to run it. So it's a horse apiece in my mind. Either way, the chair is the one deciding. So I don't fully understand the concern.
Okay, could I just respond to that?
Yes, please.
If it were any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair, then that just says, okay, we can all address the chair. And then we could sit and argue about that with the chair. Now, I said it first, you said it first. This does set some kind of logical way to proceed. Unless you want the chair to have all this latitude and then not have anything to follow at all. And that sort of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do here, to look at what are some of the best practices. Number one, I would assume they're best practices by the research that Attorney Hicken's done. And these are common ways to proceed. I would be uncomfortable, I think, as a chair, if I just said, well, okay, you're going to speak through the chair. And then each time I would have to go through a process of determining who speaks. But by saying not proceed until being recognized would be important, because you could have people repeatedly saying, I would like to be addressed. And so it provides a little bit more guidance to the chair. When two or more members address the chair at the same time, the chair shall designate the order of speaking. If you didn't have that and you left out the preceding end of that first sentence, then you could just have a continuous thing about who spoke first or second. And so I see clarity in this, that's all. Not to be restrictive, but it's clarity on process and procedure. Now, but that's how I view it as my experience as chair this past year and what I've observed previously. So I have concerns, I guess, if it just said any commissioner desiring to speak shall address the chair. Because I think we need a little bit more structure than that.
Right, because it shows then how to do it.
Right.
That's the next step. How do we do it? This is how we do it.
What I'm hearing is Commissioner Dukirk would like to remove some language and change some language in paragraph 3. Commissioner Mills could go either way, and then Commissioners Bersheim and Storley would like to keep the language as initially drafted.
I think I would like to keep it. I was just trying to further understand, and I guess my point was, sorry to interrupt first off, but my point was that with number 2 specifically, either way it was written, the chair still is the one making the decision. It's just that in one case it spells it out, and to Commissioner Bersheim's point, there's more clarity. And I don't know, and it is a little more restrictive in that there is the structure spelled out there. But I don't find that. I guess the restriction is on the chair, or I guess it's on everyone. I don't know. I would like to keep it as is. Number 2, number 3. Number 3, I think I would like to keep as well. But I'd like to hear more from Commissioner Dukirk on what more about the concerns with number 3.
You guys hear that feedback?
Yeah, that's Dave.
Oh. Might be giving us feedback, Dave.
Attorney Hicken. So on number 2, if a chair comes in and wants to be less restrictive than what's currently written in the bylaws, then the bylaws will have to be voted on again. That was kind of where I was coming from, was to allow the flexibility. I don't know that any chair has had an issue with operating a meeting because we've never had bylaws to this point. But if the current chair thinks that this needs to be in there so that meetings can be run, then go ahead and leave it in there because I'm not going to be around. And I guess the same with number 3, just number 3 to me feels a lot like a lecture.
I mean, I think bylaws, that comment can be made generally about bylaws, and is that they kind of feel like a lecture, but it's a tool. It should not be used as a weapon, but it's a tool to help guide the group of commissioners in how do we run a meeting. And it becomes most useful, frankly, when there is a conflict, whether it's a personality conflict or a conflict of opinion. There is somewhere where you can go to find the rules, and there's some reference you can make that is not tied to any one person specifically, one individual, but is tied to this set of rules that we all agreed to together. And I think, depending on the level of expertise of your chair, they might wish to have something more general so they can have more discretion. Or if they're brand new at the job, they might wish to have more guidance. So this is trying to strike a balance between allowing that discretion and providing the guidance.
So when I'm looking at number 3, I'm just going to throw out an example because Dave has a lot of input in the meetings and I have a lot of questions, and both Dave and I have a lot of questions looking for clarity when we are speaking to each other or when other commissioners are speaking. So how this is written and how this will play out is Dave is talking. And if I have a question for Dave, I then need to ask the chair for permission to ask Dave a question, which seems really silly, especially when we're sitting next to each other. And Dave and I can just put my hand up and Dave can go, did you have a question? And Dave can address me when he's not the chair and let me ask my question for him to continue. And the way this is written is I cannot interrupt or say anything until Dave is completely done speaking, which could be 10 minutes, which is great, Dave. That's not an insult. And I have to wait for the chair to address me, which if someone else had their hand up first, then they would start talking. And so 45 minutes later, I get to go back to a question about what Dave was saying, which completely may change the conversation. And that's where 3 has me concerned. I understand not interrupting someone when's talking, but for me to have to wait until my turn to get to a simple question.
I could try to respond to that. And I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Dukert, but what you're saying is true of all the other commissioners as well. And so, it does, maybe this can be modified. I could try to find a way, I guess, in my own thinking, but based upon my experience, this equality of access to speak is important. And equity is important. And so in order to have everyone have some kind of equal opportunity, there has to be some kind of order. Otherwise, it could be a complete dialogue between 2 people, 2 commissioners. And that would be, I suppose, if that's what we wanted, that would be fine. But everyone has to have equity and access to speak. And I think this statement, unfortunately, it's up to the chair, but I don't know of any other way to do that. I guess there are meetings where you don't have any bylaws at all and just have wide open discussion, which could be conducive to work sessions. But so I think we've got to be careful about this equity issue. And I don't know any other way to get around that by having some kind of order on how the people should have their opportunity to speak.
So Myron, this statement takes away my equity. If Dave uses an acronym, if you use an acronym, if Ginny uses an acronym that I don't understand during a conversation, and I don't get to say, what does Mark mean until 45 minutes later, I'm lost in the conversation because I don't understand a term.
I think this
My equity is removed.
I think this might be a misinterpretation of what's written here. In the case where there was an acronym you didn't understand, you would raise your hand or ask Mr. Chair, and yes, that is asking for recognition, and the chair can either grant you that or not. The commissioner speaking can indicate to the chair whether they're okay with, that's that consent part. You address the chair. Chair, can I have clarification on that acronym? Commissioner Mills can say, sure, that acronym is this, and then he moves on. That's the procedure here. It's not to wait until he's finished every word of his comments.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can see Commissioner Dukert's concern because it is not my style personally to wait until the very end, because mid discussion I could have a question or a clarifying question or whatever. I think it's just as part of my role as a commissioner, I need to change my style a little and write down my questions and respectfully wait until the end. So I do share the concerns, but I do see the importance of order and clarity, even though it's not really how I operate. I think it is for the good of the board and the order and the chair, or and the chair, no, and the county. But it really does show the importance of a good chair and a fair chair. Either way it does. So.
In the interest of time, what I would suggest is that we move on, and in the final draft, when the final draft is presented, if Commissioner Dukirk still has strong feelings about this language, she can suggest that there be an amendment before she consents or approves or votes in approval. Can we move on?
Sure.
Here's the procedure for making a motion. You obtain the floor. That's what we talked about already. State the motion, another member seconds, and then the chair states the question on the motion to the group. That's something we sometimes do and sometimes don't do. And then the motion is open for debate. In the debate, the person who made the motion goes first. There's the debate. Chairperson puts the question to a vote, and then the result of the vote is announced. You can change your vote any time up to the point that the result is announced. Commissioner Mills?
Thank you. Instead of debate, should we say discussion?
Sure. Is there consensus with that change?
Yes.
There's 2 points where it is, at least 2 points. Generally, discussion is permitted. Here's the other thing I wanted to check in with the board. Discussion of a subject is permitted only with reference to the pending motion and after the seconding of the motion. Is that the intent of the board?
Yeah, could I just ask a question on that one, just for some better understanding? Generally, which I understand, discussion of a subject is permitted only with reference to the pending motion after the seconding of the motion. So when we've been operating by telephone and to some extent Zoom, at least at times I have done a roll call of people's thoughts on the pending motion on the topic. In other words, it's an agenda item and it says it's a resolution or approved by or something like that. So that is preceding the seconding of the motion on the topic. So clarify that for me, especially during the pandemic. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something there, but I see a little confusion in that first statement, because after the seconding of the motion, are you talking about we can't have a discussion on an agenda item until after a motion has been seconded?
That's how these rules set it up. And that's the general rule of Robert's Rules of Order.
So we shouldn't have discussion at all on a topic, round robin or anything, until after a motion has been made and seconded.
That's the strict interpretation of Robert's Rules of Order. Now,
Does that fit in? Okay, and so, okay, well, then I have not been doing that, and I don't think we have for quite a while, and that's fine. But that's a significant change, and that's okay. But I'm just saying that will make a big change in how we proceed from
Molly?
past practice.
That's why I wanted to ask commissioners if that's your intent. Yep.
So we kind of sort of, and you probably remember this, we kind of sort of adhered to first a motion needed to be made. And often what happened is all 5 of us stared at each other for 30 minutes because no one wanted to be the one, especially when it was a difficult discussion. So having an open discussion beforehand allows us all to feel each other out and see where we go. Sometimes the motion that is on the agenda is what is made. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I can't come up with one now because we have the consent agenda and stuff. But the discussion before the motion is really helpful.
So you've got a couple, oh, Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, there is somewhere here talking about preliminary discussion. I don't remember where I read that. And so it's good to point that out, I think, but it's certainly not here. And I think there is a lot of value to having preliminary discussion about, preliminary discussion about agenda items.
It's up in A, discussion other than preliminary discussion is not in order unless there is a pending motion.
So could we define preliminary discussion and work that into the sentence under making a motion?
How would you
Since-
define?
I'm sorry.
How would you define it?
Generally, I'd have to think about this. The board chair could seek preliminary discussion before moving for a motion and an appropriate second or support as part of the discussion of an agenda item. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it seems tricky, but I think preliminary discussion is very important.
Yeah.
Right.
I really,
Yeah.
and I really think, and I believe, and I know what Robert Rules of Order, but I know I've learned a lot and from others in that seeking consensus is important. And it doesn't mean that we have to operate by census. Some county boards do. I brought this up at a session, I believe North Branch or that county did use straw votes sometimes as well. And boards have used that. And I used it a lot in the past, trying to seek consensus, especially on very difficult topics where you were trying to get everyone's voice heard, so that when you make the motion, especially if it's not something in an agenda item that's very specific, that you could reach some kind of consensus by your preliminary discussion. You see what I mean? Before the
Right.
motion is made.
Mhm.
And so it's the seeking consensus seems to be a productive way to try to do business. Otherwise you get so locked down and making an order or motion that doesn't pass and so forth. And there's a time and place for that. So I would say, yeah, good. You just did it? I don't know.
I
It's up there. So yeah, making a motion.
Well, the trick is like, what is discussion? What else? What other discussion is there besides
'cause it's
preliminary?
Because it is an agenda item, but yeah, I don't know. Interesting.
And to Commissioner Dukirk's point, I can easily see that happening. And she said it happened, that they would just sit there and nobody would say anything. Yeah, so it seems trickier than I didn't see any problem with it before, but yeah, I think, I mean, just reading through this, I mean, but I do see where we want to have preliminary discussion allowed.
Commissioner Bershheim, can I respond to Commissioner Mills?
Go ahead. Yeah, but we're
So
not
Commissioner-
operating by that. You can speak through Attorney Hicken. Thank you.
Well, I'm just trying to follow rules that we don't have. So here, I got an example, Commissioner Mills, and this goes way back to before you were there. So we would set our budget, and in our budget, we would agree to buy a $400,000 excavator. We would agree. We would debate it for 6 hours, and we would agree to buy a $400,000 excavator. And then the department head would come in the next year after the budget's been approved and adopted and sent to the state and tell us that he or she is proceeding with buying that excavator. And we would again debate it for another 4 hours. And yes, I'm exaggerating a little, but not really. And no one wanted to make the motion because the community would be upset because somehow they missed that it was already an approved budget item. And so even the most crazy thing, I mean, we already agreed to buy this excavator, but no one wants to be the one to make the motion, even though we made the motion. And that's where it comes in, that this preliminary discussion, it's more about understanding not only for ourselves, but understanding for the community. And if we didn't have the discussion again, the community was like, oh, look, they had a $400 excavator on their agenda today and they just approved it without any discussion. And so that's where the preliminary discussion comes in, if that makes sense.
So you're saying it's preliminary in that it was a previous meeting, right? Versus just in that meeting?
Well, it's a preliminary discussion because we're not making the motion first and then discussing. We're sitting there going, okay, here's our next agenda item. The department head presents it and then we talk about it and then we make the motion. And we move to that because of the community's desire for us to not just listen to our department heads and then make a motion and approve it. They wanted a full discussion to see us talking about it.
I think that's what we're talking about right now. Before we state the motion, we have,
Yep.
before us, we have the fact that we're going to be looking at whatever, and we discuss it and then get to the point of stating a motion.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Yes, we need discussion, preliminary, if that's the word.
Okay, so the way it's written now under C, generally discussion of a subject, then parenthetically, other than preliminary discussion. To me, that seems to be a little bit more clear. Is it to others?
Well, what I was wondering is what other discussion is there?
Right. Well, preliminary discussion would be the discussion prior to a motion.
Mhm.
Right, and Dave is saying that's seems like a really broad, maybe you're saying it's almost so broad, it's no rule at all,
Okay.
just because we don't know what preliminary discussion means. We could say limited preliminary discussion. I mean, by leaving the language broad, you do give a little more discretion to the chair to determine what is preliminary discussion and what isn't.
Right.
So,
Well, we have Gary who joined, and it is 11:01.
Yeah.
how do you wish to proceed, Mr. Chair?
Well, I guess we have a commitment to be 11 o'clock meeting, special meeting. So I would assume that we'll just continue this at our next committee of the whole, if that's what everyone else agrees to. And we'll just see if we can get through this in September. And if we have to go into October, we got time, we can devote time to it. So unless people think differently, I think we should use this time with the consultant and go forward with the administrator research and visit this at the next committee of the whole meeting in September. Is that a logical way to go for everyone? Okay,
Right, that's good. Right.
sure.
Okay.
Well, let's take just a 5-minute break and then we'll start exactly. Well, let's take 11:07 with Mr. Wires. Okay, is that all right, Gary? Okay, let's do that. 5-minute break.
Is anybody else here?
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Pam. Is there feedback now?
No, but it was really bad before.
Okay. I'm going to try again. Let me know.
This is perfect.
Well,
That's it.
it's still going.
No, I don't hear it. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's your headphone.
Yeah.
Do you have another one? I wonder what that's about.
No.
Can you hear
I think-
without it?
Yeah. It's just. Yeah. No, we're good.
What's, yeah, tell me.
Oh, it's just my speakers are blown out on my Surface, and so I was using these because I can hear better,
Got it.
and it's like more contained. I'm not sure a good solution. I guess I'll just get a higher quality set of.
So I have a couple of extra pairs. I'm not sure if they'll be more effective or higher quality, but you're certainly willing to test them out if you'd like to, since I have them available.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, I have a few more pairs as well, but they're very similar, so I'm suspicious that it'll have similar results.
Have access to them right
And I'll do some research though. Thank you. And it's good to know. It's good to know I've got options. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Commissioner.
How are you?
Good morning.
Doing well. Doing well. Beautiful day here. Looks like the sun is shining there as well out a few of your windows. So
Yep.
Very nice.
good.
Hey, Dave, I have some really cute penguin speakers.
See, I'm looking for, yeah, I don't know what I'm looking for.
Okay, we'll call our special meeting to order for August 18th. The purpose of this meeting is to initiate, I guess, or continue our search for an administrator going forward, and we've all had the opportunity to review the information that Gary has sent to us. So with that, I want to make sure we got everyone on board before I call on you, Gary, to go forward with the meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I was having some feedback issues, and so I'm gonna try to troubleshoot that for less interference. Please let me know if I'm
Okay.
disrupting.
Yeah, no, and I'm not experiencing or hearing anything like we heard before. So I think you've corrected it.
Well, now is probably its
Oh.
feedback. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to try to switch microphones, but keep my speakers here. But
I don't mind it. It's not really feedback. It's kind of like having aliens visiting us during the meeting.
Beep, 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 beep. Really, you're fine, Dave.
You did that really well, Ginny.
Not
Okay,
We've
well,
all
that's-
discovered a talent from Ginny that we didn't know she had. She can talk to aliens.
Yeah, right. So talented.
Okay, Gary, are you with us? I don't see you, but
Yes, I'm with you.
okay. I'm not seeing you on my screen, but go ahead, I guess. Well, now I am. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for all the work that you've done. It seems very promising. The kind of candidates that we've referred to, especially compared to the initial search. So I think I'd like to turn it over to you. You have provided us with information. I think it'd be good for you to emphasize again how we're going to proceed with lack of identification of names and so forth. So thanks again. And thanks for joining us today and all the work that you're doing to help us.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I'll provide a little brief overview of kind of how we got here, and then talk about the process for today and go through what the items are for your discussion and decision today. So first of all, as you know, we put the process on hold when the COVID situation arose in March, and that was postponed until June 24th is when we reposted the position. We ended up with 34 applicants for the position, which was considerably more than what we had the first time. From that group, I selected candidates to move on to this phase of the process where we are today. There were originally 14 people, 6 folks departed at that point because of accepting new positions or having a change of heart. There was a variety of reasons given, but that typically happens. Not always that many, but it does happen regularly. Those remaining 8 people then completed a personality index and a short video interview. So as the chair pointed out, the board has now had access to cover letter, resume, video interview, and personality index on each of these 8 candidates. So what we are here to do today is, first of all, to pick finalists that you'd like to bring in for your final interview. Secondly is to talk about what do you want that final interview to look like. And then thirdly is whether or not you wish to provide any reimbursement to candidates to travel for the interview, presuming that it would be an in-person final interview that is conducted. So one of the things the chair referenced, and I want to reinforce, is that so Minnesota law is a little bit awkward when it comes to this discussion. You have to have this discussion in an open public meeting of the board, which you are doing. However, you cannot identify candidates at this point in the process because their identities are protected. So we will use a numbering system today to talk about candidates. The board is aware of the numbers and who the candidates are, and I am, but anyone else watching, et cetera, would not have access to that information. So it is a little bit awkward. I will point out, not only should the commissioners not use names during our discussion today, but any other identifiers. For example, if someone said, candidate number 37 was a city or county administrator in County A, well, you just identified who that person is by saying where they work and what their position is. So it's important to not talk about that. So, I'll jump in if we deviate from that a little bit. Looks like Commissioner Phelps has a question.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And to clarify that, Gary, a little bit. Oh, and here we have the feedback, I'm sure. Does that include gender?
Does that mean we should keep it to a number and that's it, right?
Right. I mean, sometimes it's easy to slip and say a gender identifier. I mean, it's important not to say gender, but if that happens, it's not earth-shattering because you haven't said where or who. But I mean, I think it's important to try your best to just stick to candidate 1, candidate 2, et cetera. Now, I will say generally, there's usually 2 things happen. Some candidates rise to the top during our discussion here this morning, and some sink to the bottom, if you will. That means that you all have an interest in certain candidates and you all don't have an interest in some candidates. So there isn't a point, if all 5 of you agree that candidate number 1 is someone you want to interview, we don't have to have a discussion about candidate number 1 because you've just all said, we want to interview candidate number 1. Likewise, if you say candidate number 8 is someone you don't want to interview by the process we're going to go through, there's really no point in talking about that candidate either. So it's the ones in the middle where you're on the fence that warrant discussion. So the best way to proceed that I have found, the best way to proceed is to simply have each of you go around, give me, or just state your top 3 candidates in order, and then we'll see where we're at after that. In many cases, the board ends up being in a very similar place on that, and limited discussion is all that's needed, if any, in some cases. So that's my suggestion for proceeding. That's not a vote of the board. At some point here this morning, you will vote and say, here are the people that we want to bring in for the interview process, if that's your protocol. Most boards do it that way. But this initial go around is simply to say, as an individual, here's where I'm at with the numbers, and then I'll be writing them down as we go. So that's my suggestion.
That's good. I think, would you like to do that by roll call, or do you want me to do it, Gary?
Yeah, you could do it. I mean, just have each of you just go around. The order doesn't matter. I mean, the order that you go around doesn't matter. Give me, commissioners, give me the order of preference on your candidates, however.
Okay, then let's start with Commissioner Dukirk. Would you like to go first?
Oh, thanks for putting me in the hot seat. So I'll make it complicated just to start. So I have 5, 2, and I have a tie, 7 and 8.
That's okay for now. We'll loop back.
Okay, Commissioner Storley.
Okay. As we see on the chart, I have 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, Commissioner Mills.
It's pretty exciting. I have 3, 1, and 2 but I have a hard time letting go of 4.
You're saying they're equal? Would that be,
No,
okay, so it's gonna be 3, 1, 2
yes.
for our purposes now. Thank you.
Thank-
Okay.
thank
Bershheim is gonna go 5, 2, 3.
All right. So again, this is what, what usually happens. So just to feed back to you, two of you indicated that candidate number 5 was your first candidate. One of you indicated candidate number 3 was your first candidate, and one of you indicated candidate number 1 was your first candidate. Now, as we go down from there, if you look at the second position, 3 of you had candidate number 2 in the, ranked second, and one of you had candidate number 1 ranked second. So, I mean, the pattern emerging so far is candidate number 1, 2, 3, and 5, which essentially covers almost everyone that you mentioned, with the exception of candidate number 7, and Commissioner Dukert was on the fence with 7 and 8, and then candidate number 4, Commissioner Mills had mentioned that was kind of a hard one to let go of. So, so at this point, it seems to me like you have a clear, defined top 4 candidates, right? Candidate number 1, 2, 3, and 5. Is that right? Is that consistent with what you're all seeing as well? Okay.
But they're not in that order. Excuse me, Gary.
No, I didn't. For now, the order
Doesn't matter. Okay.
It doesn't matter, at this point, as much as it did initially. But so even if you weighted them, you're still going to end up with these 4 people,
Sure.
regardless of what sort of analysis you do. So I just put them in, numerical order, not
Fine.
not ranked.
Just wanted to make sure that was understood for the public. Yep.
Yeah. So
Commissioner Dukert?
It's really interesting because candidates 1 and 3 are my bottom picks.
yeah, that happens once in a while. So let me paint a picture for you here. So what I see you having is a couple of options. One is you just decide to interview those 4 candidates because those are the 4 candidates that most that appeared the most consistently across the board for the 4 of you. That's option 1. Option 2 would be to talk about an additional 5th candidate, if you will, and that would be between that 5th candidate would probably be candidate number 7 if you looked at 7 or 8, and then if you wanted
4.
or 4, right? So if you wanted to bring in a 5th candidate, the discussion now could be on should it be 7, 8, or 4. Generally, I would say, it's up to you. Since those 3 candidates, 7, 8, and 4, really did not get much support other than from an individual commissioner, generally I would advise, what's the point? But, you only have 4 total candidates right now. So, I mean, you could make an argument for let's go beyond that, just in case, one of these candidates backs out. So I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, I could just speak of mine that candidate number 4 was higher in my rankings, was actually 4th. So I could speak for 4. I'm just speaking individually, not as chair now. But then again, 7 and 8 are way down lower in mine, but that's fine. So I think I guess what I'm hearing from you, Gary, is you would like some feedback on whether we should just go with option 1, inviting 4, or we should take the time to try to select the fifth one in option 2. So
That's
why don't
correct.
and so let's just,
If you
go ahead.
wanted to go forward with that option, a second option to figure out who the fifth one is, we could just repeat the exercise too and limit it now to candidates 7, 8, or 4. Each commissioner would then just say, my top one of those 3 is, just give me one, and we'd see where you are that way if you wanted to go through that type of exercise.
Okay. Well, let's just go through this. As chair, I'll just ask, I'll ask each of you, are you comfortable with option 1, which is just to go with the top 4? And then of course, that'll indicate to us whether we just go to option 2. Okay, is that understood? So let's just start with Commissioner Dukirk again. Do you want to just go with option 1 or consider option 2?
I want option 3, which is we offer it to our top 4, and Mr. Gary has an extra option if one of those 4 drops out. So we're only interviewing 4.
Okay, so option 1 as it stands. Okay, Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. I would go with option 1 unless Commissioner Mills, who also was debatable about 4, would have any further comments about 4, along with you, Commissioner Bersheim.
Okay. All right, so, but option 1 will go say, okay, Commissioner Mills?
I like option 1. Thank
Okay,
you.
and I'm option number 1, so that's what we'll do. We'll go forward with those top 4. And Commissioner Mills, comment?
Yep, just because I want us all to be on the same page. I think what Commissioner Dukirk was saying was with option 3 was that it is option 1, but there's a contingent, or there's a backup. And I think that's implied with Gary's suggestion, but no.
Let me explain that. No, it is not implied. So let's talk about that. Generally, I discourage having a backup because here's the dilemma with a backup. We're going to be doing, starting today, we're going to be doing background checks. We're going to be doing reference checks. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of background related work on each of these candidates. And if somebody, like if I called people today and they said, no, I'm not interested, say one of those top 4, it would be easy to have a backup person in that scenario. However, 2 weeks from now, as we're closer to the interviews, there would be no way that we could get the background work done on a backup candidate. So where that would leave you is on the day of interviews or even before interviews, you would have complete information on some candidates and potentially incomplete information on this backup candidate. Now, I'm not saying we can't do it because we can do whatever you want, but if it's quick, if the person leaves quickly, it's easy to do. If they don't leave quickly, it's much more difficult.
Commissioner Dukirk?
So I would change it to a backup candidate for 24 hours. So if you're top 4, as soon as you call them, they say, I'm sorry, I took a job in Antarctica, then you could say, all right, I've got this one, because I don't want you to have to go back and forth with us and do an email exchange with us and do another vote. So I don't want it to be later down the road at all, because that is a mess.
Okay, so here's what we've done. We've gone with option 1 by just roll call. And so how could we proceed then with this second option of a backup? Just a point of order on that.
Maybe let me help you with that. So
yeah, thank you.
I think actually we'd even have a little more than 24 hours. So how about here's my suggestion for you. If you want to have a backup candidate, I think if that transpired yet this week, that would be workable. So if you said our candidates are 1, 2, 3, 5. And if one of those departs this week, then candidate, whatever, you're going to have more discussion about who that backup is. But then the backup would be automatically put in. If they don't depart this week, we move forward. That's my suggestion.
So in order to do this, then I guess we should decide on who that backup will be today. And again, this is now modifying our decision just to go with option 1. But does everyone agree with going through a process now to get the backup? Anyone disagree with that? Okay. All right. So we had a choice then of 7, 8, and 4, I believe, from what you recommended. So why don't we just review that a little bit? And Gary, go ahead and see. I guess you're experienced at this. You sort of guide us through this process to get this backup.
Yeah, so my suggestion is to simply repeat what we just did, and just in this case, give your top one. We'll see where we're at. If it's a tie, then we can go to who's your second one. But I think if you simply went around as a commission and individually said candidate number 4, 7, 8, that gets us there.
Okay, so let's go through that order then. By roll call, give your top choice for the backup interview. Commissioner Dukirk?
8.
Commissioner Storley?
4.
Commissioner Mills?
4.
Commissioner Bersheim is 4. Okay, then it'll be 4.
So with that said, then I think you're set as far as who your candidates are. My suggestion at this point is to, unless it's not your protocol, but is to just do a motion indicating that you would interview candidates 1, 2, 3, and 5. Candidate number 4 will be a backup if one of those other candidates withdraws yet this week. And then I think that gets us where we need to be with this part of the discussion.
So let's go ahead. I, as chair, will entertain a motion to go forward with the candidates. Would be 1, 2, 3, and 5, with the backup being 4.
Commissioner Dukirk, I'll make that motion.
Okay, and do we have support?
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, and we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Dukirk?
Sorry, I lost my mute button. Aye.
Commissioner Starley?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills?
Aye.
Commissioner Bersheim's aye. Passes. Very good. Okay, the next part then would be how to proceed next with the interviews, I believe, and then the reimbursement issue.
Right.
Gary, back to you again.
All right, thank you. So let's talk about interviews a little bit. Now, I presume that I know you haven't been meeting in person. My recommendation to you, however, is that we do conduct these interviews in person. If you don't want to do that, though, I mean, we can do a video interview, much like this discussion that we're having now. It certainly can be done. I just get queasy with making hiring decisions on people you've never met, but that's just me. Now, with interviews, there are parts of the interview that we can maintain very good social distancing. We can use masks. We can clean tables in between interviews. So I think we can take actions that ensure candidate safety as well as commissioner safety and others that may participate. So I think the first question for you, well, let me talk that through more. So the first question is going to be, should we do it in person? The next question is, what's the structure? So 2 pieces that are very easy to do, and I've done this since COVID has started, is to have the full board interview in person, whether that's in your boardroom or wherever. And it may mean we have to change the structure a little bit or have tables spaced differently or whatever, but it's very doable to accomplish that, as well as department head interviews. I recommend the county boards definitely have a department head interview where they provide feedback to the board about candidates. They don't rank candidates. They don't say, here's my number one, here's my number two. It's more, how are they going to get along in this agency? What do you see as their strengths? Give you feedback like that, that you can then have prior to making your decisions as a county board. So that would be one component. And then the full board interview of each of the candidates as well. Normally I would suggest you could consider some sort of community involvement. However, that's a little challenging to do in today's environment. You could have a community panel if you wanted, like a few community members participate in a panel interview of each candidate. We could try to do like a virtual meet and greet. That's possible. I'm not sure how effective that would be, but I'll stop talking at this point and just listen to your thoughts, first of all, about in person, and then secondly, what are the components?
Okay, just one question before we proceed with that. Could we, or is it understood that I do support doing this in person? It just makes a lot of sense if, as long as no one has some concerns about public health issues, we have to make sure that we address those appropriately. So I guess I will just ask openly to any commissioner, is there anyone that would like to speak against and give their rationale for doing personal interviews? Okay, good. Then I think that's what we should do. Then the next question I have, it's maybe for the commissioners and for you too, Gary, as chair, is when we have these interviews in the courthouse where we have the opportunity to do a virtual video, a Zoom meeting to the public. They could actually, it would go out live stream, excuse me, and like we do for this meeting and for other meetings, and then encourage the public that watches this to contact a commissioner or give feedback in written form, preferably by email. Is that a possibility?
Yes.
That way we're getting some input from the public and they're actually have the opportunity to observe our process. And I'm all for that. But I would assume that when we do these 5 interviews, my next question is, I guess we would see if someone really comes to the top, but if someone doesn't, then do we do final interviews? So I haven't heard you provide information on that. So Gary, could you just answer that and then we'll open it up.
Okay. So generally what happens 95+% of the time, a candidate rises to the top and the board is ready to proceed with making an offer the day of the interviews.
Okay.
And the reason that I say that is you are going to have all of the background information on these candidates approximately a week before the interview. You're going to have a ton of information. You will be in a position to make a decision the day of the interviews. Now, I'm not saying you have to, because the worst thing you can do is force a decision. If you were to do public feedback, like you described, Commissioner, that might get complicated as far as timing. If that were the case, you would probably want to not make a decision the day of the interviews and schedule a special meeting or something a day or two later if you were going to get feedback like that.
That was sort of my intention, was that you would do it. That would, if we did it with the feedback from the community, it'd more than likely be a meeting the next week. So Commissioner Dukirk, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
So the last 2 administrators we hired, we did the interviews. We had a consensus agreement the day of the interviews, and we made it official at the next board meeting. The last 2 administrators, we had an open house before we did the final interviews. So they came up and met with the public, which that was not during COVID. So my suggestion would be that we do the final interview at the community center which is more conducive to social distancing for us and the candidates, but would also allow room for citizens. And I guess I'd kind of ask the citizens to contact our interim administrator to let them know if they're coming, so we have the right amount of distancing in chairs if they wish to participate. The community has always been welcome to come to our final interviews, and they have chosen not to in the past. So that's just from my past experience. Obviously, you can do whatever you want.
Okay, Commissioner Mills?
Community center is the EOC.
There's also an ice rink.
I will just speak to that. I think there would have to be a lot of control, and then you could have equity issues. If you had it in the rink, I mean, you're supposed to only have gatherings of so much size, and probably not that many would attend, but I think by doing it by video, we then are following the best health practices, at least in regards to the pandemic. It could be problematic if we did it by any in-person kind of thing by the public. That's just my thoughts, but Commissioner Mills, your thoughts?
Well, I guess I would like to know more about the why, the reasons behind. I thought I remembered hearing department head interviews are not appropriate, but Gary, you were recommending that, and I saw Pam Dixon, our HR director, nodding about that. And so I guess I would like to know more why about department head interviews, and I would also like to know more about the public's participation, whereas of course I want the public to see and hear and participate as much as possible. You know, we are the elected representatives, and I don't know how accurate a representation is to have some of the public give input, but not all the public to have the lens. And, you know, I just see some inconsistencies and difficulties there. So help me understand the pros and cons of both department head interviews as well as the public open house or interview or whatever. And it looks like
Commissioner DeKirk, did you want to respond before we go to Gary on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, the department heads have been involved in the last 2 administrator hires. They do their interview, and then they have a spokesperson who lets the board know what their decision is. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that the department head interview happened, the county board interview happened before the county board went into discussion of who their top candidate was. The department head representative came in and told the board what their top candidate was and had a discussion on that. Go ahead, Dave.
Commissioner Mills?
Thank you. And so Gary was recommending that department heads not do that, but instead just give feedback on the candidates. And so that's different than what we've done in the past. And I'd like insight on those 2 processes.
Me too.
Okay, Gary, would you like to respond?
Sure. So first of all, if we could do it either way, my experience is that, so first of all, I'm not a fan of having a spokesperson for a group, because what happens with group dynamics is that some people never speak and their voice is not heard, and therefore their voice is not shared through the spokesperson. And spokespeople tend to insert their feelings a little more than the groups. So I actually discourage that. The way I have typically handled it is to have each individual department head who is participating complete a short, simple questionnaire. How is this person going to fit? What are their strengths? What are they bringing? I mean, things like that each individual person completes. I then, while the board is interviewing, I then send that down to my assistant who compiles all that information, and then that information verbatim from each of the individual department heads is then shared with the county board. I generally don't ask for rankings because you don't get to pick your boss. However, if you wanted to, it's simple to say rank the candidates as well, and that information could also be shared with the board. So I'm not, if you want to do a spokesperson, follow that kind of model that you used, you certainly can. I don't recommend that. I'd rather give each person, each individual a right to respond and not be subject to the group dynamic.
I'd just like to speak that I support what you're saying there, Gary.
Right. I think it's really important to have the department heads as part of the process. Doing it the way Gary suggested, I think is very unbiased. Not that it probably would be, but anyway, having gone through one decision-making on an administrator, with that in mind, I would rather have individuals write and maybe rank whom they would suggest.
Okay, so I think we could agree that we'll proceed with the department head interviews. Okay, Commissioner Dukirk, please respond.
Dave had his hand up, so I didn't want to
I couldn't
consensus
see
until.
Dave sitting in the dark. Oh, okay. I
Sorry,
couldn't see your hand. Use your left hand, please. I can see it in the shadow with your right. Oh, there. Okay. I'm sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Dukirk. I'll refer to you, Mr. Mills.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I saw Commissioner Dukirk shaking her head. So maybe that was on my behalf. But what I was going to ask was, I'm in agreement with department head involvement as well as that feedback. I don't like the ranking by department heads or the spokesperson, just like Gary is lying out. I appreciate his experience and we'll lean on that certainly. And so there's my feedback on that. I'm still curious about the public side of things and experiences there.
Okay, Commissioner Dukirk.
Yeah, and I agree with Gary's approach on how he wants to do this. I will tell you, during the first administrator interviews, we had the spokesperson come in and tell the board that if we hired candidate number 3, half of the staff would quit. And if we had hired candidate 3, maybe they would still be our administrator and I wouldn't have to do this excruciating process again. So that's really great that you're going to take all that weight off of our shoulders. You're fabulous, worth every penny we pay you. Thank you so much. And community input, Dave, the last 2 times we had the open house and the community was available. I didn't get any input from the community except for watching how they interacted with each candidate and what their facial expressions were, which really isn't a lot of input. It doesn't tell you a whole lot. And them, you know, us doing it in the community center and the ice rink and having them have the ability to be there does not mean they have the ability to talk and tell us what to do. It just means that they watch our process and see us do the interviews. They have not come into the commissioner room pre-COVID because a lot of times there have been staff and us and the room is pretty crowded before COVID because it's a big room, but it's not a very big room. And so by moving it out of the commissioner's room, it makes it more welcoming for the community than the way that it currently is. I know that that makes it less welcoming for the staff because they're not able to just come down and come into the room, and we could easily set up a computer and have it Zoom so they can see the conversation like we do now, where there's a computer in someone's office and they can go in. My fear is if we do Zoom in the commissioner's room, then we have people in the meeting, and how do we respond to them when they're live stream like we are now with all of our little boxes and you can't see them at all. So I don't know.
Okay. Just for clarity, my thought, and I wasn't necessarily advocating for it, but I think if we're going to have something at the community center, we need to have Grace Granager involved. We'll have to go through a process because by state statute, there are certain policies and procedures and protocols you have to follow when you have group gatherings. And so I think we'd have to resolve some of those issues. Now, am I wrong on that by saying that there's certain issues that you have to follow from the state?
Myron, that would be exactly the same as the commissioner's room because it is open to the public. Our interview is public. So it'd be the exact same protocol. So we should talk to Grace because I think that we will be violating protocols by having it in the commissioner's room because there's not enough room to social distance.
Okay, so what I was saying is that if we had it in the commissioner's room, it would be by live stream, and that would be the participation of the public was to be able to view that and not be in attendance. It would be closed for attendance, except for those staff that need to be there, and they could have access to the live stream and provide input to commissioners as they would see fit. That was my understanding of that.
Legally, I don't think we can have it as a closed meeting. I think it has to be open to the public.
That's a good question. We don't have Molly Hick, and you could be right. You could be right.
It
I
has
think
been
we
open in
need
the
to,
past.
before we make a
There she
decision.
is.
Good.
Commissioners, it has to be done in a public meeting. What the commissioner part does that, but that doesn't mean there aren't COVID things that apply here that allow you to stream it as a public meeting. Right. So you're talking about two different things regarding, I mean, yes, it has to be a public meeting. Does that mean you have to have public sitting in the audience or not? I think that's a separate question.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, Administrator Rogers has been wanting to speak.
Excuse me. Okay, I'm glad you're there, and I guess I can't see all of you, so thank you for helping me out with that, Commissioner Mills. We'll start with Administrator Rogers. I'm sure you got some input, and then if Attorney Hicken wants to offer something, we'll go to you next. Go ahead, Reno.
So our ability to live stream really is limited to the commissioner room, I would just say. And I think under the current governor's orders, indoor meetings are restricted to 25 people or less. And that would include the board, candidates, whoever else was there. So I'm not weighing in, I'm just letting you know what is there.
Okay, Attorney Hicken. You're mute.
Sorry about that. I agree with what Administrator Rogers just said, and also what Mr. Wires has said, that the question of whether the open meeting is, there's a question under open meeting law, and there's a question under the law that requires us to have certain candidate selection processes public. So I just need to know what you'd like to do, and I can tell you how to legally do it. I don't, I think you should make that decision first and let us research.
Okay, Commissioner Starley, and then we'll go to Commissioner Dukirk.
Thank you. I don't agree to have a public meeting as such. I think with our pandemic and so forth, it's too risky. However, if we could somehow have the public watch as we interview, and then as Commissioner Bersheim suggested, maybe some feedback after that point would be, I think, acceptable. But for my part, not any public gathering.
Okay. Then we'll go to Commissioner Dukirk. You had your hand up too.
Yep. We've never live streamed the interviews of administrators. Not saying we can't do it now, but I think it'll be difficult if we're social distancing in the commissioner's room. That camera has one angle and one viewpoint. So I don't know how the public's going to witness what we're doing or tell whose voices are talking. In the past, we had a cameraman that could go around the room and take a look at what's going on. And we can limit the number of people in the community center. We can say it's a maximum of 25. So that's why I say you contact the interim administrator in advance, and you can bring one of the county surfaces to the meeting and have a person available to move that around the room so the public can witness it and actually see who's talking and what's going on.
Anyone else? I'll speak to that. Again, I think of equity issues that we should have equal access. And if we limit it to so many people, maybe not all will attend, but we're precluding people by a number. So I think the live stream is a way that we can have equity to all people, and they'll still have the, ability. But again, I think we heard from Administrator Rogers on that, and then with Grace as well. But
Myron, we would still be on Zoom, so there would still be equity for people to see what's going on.
Would Zoom take care of it?
Yes.
That's my question. Or would live streaming be better? Okay, so we have a discussion on that. Based
Mr.
upon,
Mr.
yes.
White has his hand up.
I'm sorry.
Gary has his hand up.
Good. I was going to go to him. Okay, Gary, go ahead.
So I think I'd like to try and simplify this a little bit. Pre-COVID, the number of people that would come to an interview I never saw more than 5. So with COVID, I can't imagine that number goes up. So, but, well, don't raise your thumb yet. I'm not sure that being such a small number would warrant an alternative location, because the alternative location doesn't have any better camera service than what your current location does. Unless they're set up for multiple angles, multiple options, you're still going to have the same video challenges that you have in your boardroom. My suggestion is you do it in your boardroom. And furthermore, don't leave the window for feedback open very long. So the chances are pretty good you're not going to get any feedback from the public, because that's usually what happens. So if you say we're going to let people give feedback for 3 days or 4 days or whatever, or we're going to postpone a decision for a week, you could have a candidate slip through during that time because you're waiting for the one email you're going to get from somebody giving you feedback. My suggestion is do it in the boardroom. Say to people, you have 30 minutes to give your feedback. Send an email. If you're going to watch the interviews and you want to give feedback, send an email in 30 minutes. And then have an email set up for them to send it to, and then you can consider that same day. If you're ready to make a decision, I would hate to see you delayed by waiting on emails from the public.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Okay, that's worthwhile. So what you're saying is that we could do interviews in the morning and then have a recess and call the board to, or just do it all at one sitting.
So generally the way this would go is the board would do interviews in the afternoon. The
Okay,
department heads would do interviews in the morning. That feedback gets brought together, compiled. The board is doing interviews in the afternoon. And then I'm giving you, at the end of that, I'm giving you the feedback from department heads. You would then also have feedback from the public if they were going to weigh in via email. You could consider that at that time as well. You could take a short break, but that's generally how I would, in today's world, that's how I would suggest you do it.
okay. So I'm just going to ask the group, anyone oppose that suggestion? I think it's good professional advice. Okay, then let's go ahead with that. Let's, I think we should do that in a motion then, or don't we have to? That's just a procedural thing.
I don't feel like you need to, but if you
Okay,
have.
no, let's not do it. Okay, I'm fine.
You
It's
will
a
need to do a
procedural.
motion and set a special meeting though for that afternoon.
Sure.
So I'll get a time firmed up. I'll work with Pam on that. We'll get that schedule figured out here quickly so you can then get that meeting scheduled.
Okay, so then I think we're ready to proceed with reimbursement. I guess I just feel it's protocol that we reimburse people for their expenses. It's just rare that I've ever heard in my experience in public administration that you wouldn't. It does not send a good message of professionalism. So would anyone be against reimbursements? That would be mileage, it'd be house, lodging and mileage and meals and all that.
For coming up for their interview
Right,
for the candidates?
right.
damn, I should have applied. I've never applied for a job where someone else paid for me to come do an interview.
Oh, interesting. I've never done it any other way. What is the protocol, Gary?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I normally see is probably about 50% don't do any reimbursement for candidates. Another 25% do a very minimal reimbursement for candidates, such as if you're doing interviews on whatever we're doing September 10th, then there would be a hotel night paid for September 9th, for example. That's one option. And then the third would be the more comprehensive, Mr. Chair, that you described, to pay travel expenses. If you take that comprehensive approach, my advice is to like cap it at a certain dollar amount. You know, you don't want people flying first class or, you know, just doing things that are unusual. So if you were going to do that, you know, put a cap on it at $1,000 or $500 or whatever makes sense to you. So those are generally the three options that I see with boards and city councils.
Okay, so to move forward, I guess let's say just raise your hand or say I can't. Yeah, Commissioner Storley, you could give it verbally, but should we not provide any reimbursement? Who would be in favor of that? Commissioner Dukirk? Anyone else? Okay, how about just a set amount? What I've seen is there's a limitation on airfare, which typically, you know, would be capped, and then it would be meals and or mileage by driving for those that are closer. But that's an option, I guess, and we'd go by what you recommend there. So I would like to just get some feedback as by raising your hand or saying yes, that you would support that. Commissioner Storley, what do you
Yes.
think you would?
Yeah.
Commissioner Mills? Okay.
Commissioner Dukirk, you know, I support some reimbursement, but Commissioner Dukirk had her hand up and I don't know why.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to the next. I'm not trying to exclude her, but I just wanted to get a feeling from the board on the question that was whether we should have none or have some.
Some, yeah.
Okay.
At
All
the
right.
minimum some.
Sure.
My thinking is I want to do everything I can to encourage the best candidate we can get.
Okay, and I've